Dr. Pissarro is currently Professor of Art History and Director of the Hunter College Galleries at the City University of New York. He was formerly Curator of Painting and Sculpture at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and earlier in his career, a curator at the Kimball Art Museum in Fort Worth and the Yale University Art Galleries in New Haven. Joachim received his MA at the Courtauld Institute in London and his PhD in art history at the University of Texas in Austin, as did I, which is where we first met. His many publications include the Catalogue raisonné of the artist Camille Pissarro, and you may notice the similarity to his own name. Camille Pissarro, the great post-impressionist painter, was Joachim's great-grandfather. His latest book, authored with David Carrier, is called Wild Art, and this is about which he'll speak tonight. Please help me welcome Joachim Pissarro.
Thank you. Thank you, Don, for those kind words. And I shall begin. Don was telling me about an extraordinary situation that occurred when, and please no comparison as far as this is concerned, but between President Clinton and Vanessa Drummond, who is an artist who is represented in the show The State of the Art, and you have hopefully seen, and which is absolutely, as far as I'm concerned, astounding. And apparently, Vanessa Drummond, whom I haven't met yet, but do expect to meet as soon as I can, who lives in Pittsburg, said a few words extemporaneously, and Clinton decided to tear off his prepared speech and said, I don't know how to follow up with this, you know. So I'm going to do also something totally extemporaneous, given the unfortunate, dramatic, horrifying situation that has occurred today in Paris. I was not born in Paris, but I was born in France. I carry dual citizenship. As an American citizen, I also have a French passport, and I am sure you can imagine what we all feel in the West in front of this nameless tragedy. I would like to quote Vanessa Drummond in this wonderful book, of which, by the way, this is an extraordinary concept, Don. I have to applaud Don and his curators and all his teams in this incredible institution that have put together this life-transforming, I can only use that word, exhibition to which I will return many times. And I do think it is an historical landmark. I really believe you have changed the way one sees art. And so thank you all for doing this. So here's Vanessa Drummond of Pittsburg. We were surrounded by a lot of death as little kids. I had a difficult time understanding how somebody could just die. If this can happen, then what do I want to see happen with my life if I get taken out tomorrow? I'm always looking for a way to be the most alive while I'm alive. End of quote. I think, pardon me, but it is difficult not to be slightly emotional, but I read this today, and there we are. So, trying to regain composure, I would say that this exhibition, Don's exhibition, I should name the few curators who have participated. Don, help me, please, because Chad, I don't know if he's here tonight. Yeah, Chad has done an absolutely incredible job. And your director, whom I just met, Rod, I don't know if he's still here. Yes, at the back, Rod. And I know Mindy has just just joined your team, but I mean, basically all three of you, and I'm sure everyone who's worked with you, although you have a very small team as well, which is another miracle that is part of the Crystal Bridges story, have done something absolutely amazing there. And what I think, I'd like to begin by the end, sort of summarize what this, of course I'm biased because this book of mine resonates, and David Carrier resonates very much with what Don and his team have put together, but I think that this show incarnates very, very, very much to the core the words spoken by Vanessa, insofar as creativity is about being alive, being, as she puts it, as much the most alive one can be while being alive. You know, and I would like to add to this, if I may comment on Vanessa German's word, that this kind of explosion of creativity that one sees in so many different forms, in so many different fashions, in so many different media, from so many different areas. What part of the United States have you not seen? None. I mean, did you go to Hawaii? No. Okay. Okay. But it's just amazing. You have a map where every corner, it's just mesmerizing. And what I would like to say is that this really is a celebration of creativity at its utmost. And that's what I'm going to talk about. And so, if you allow me, in fact, here's an image that you will probably see again, an image that I absolutely love, by a couple of people. They're from Brooklyn, are they? So you see, they're on my doorstep. I live in Manhattan, never heard about, I'm ashamed to say. Ghost of Dream, Forever Almost. I love that particular title. I mean, this is, to me, extremely interesting because that is Jamie Adams. I don't know her or him. But I do believe that without knowing anything about his work, and all the works that I discovered today, I'd virtually never seen before. So it's been like a lesson, a bolting, struck experience. And what he is talking about, what he's referring to, is what we know in art historical terms as the 19th century academicist tradition that was kind of blotted out mostly, certainly out of Europe. I think America was much smarter by allowing parts of it to come in and inflect its own creativity and its own course. But Europe, throughout the history of modernism, that's what I'm going to talk about, basically made this kind of imagery absolutely prohibited, you know, from an insider museum kind of world. And here's Vanessa German. The piece is much bigger. Some of you must have seen. I mean, it's a large installation. It is absolutely mesmerizing. I'm going to try something. Yes, you need, just if you see this little detail here. This is the mouth, the lips of this character is made of a shell. And everything else is a shell. All these little things are a multitude, an accumulation of shells, but so cleverly put together and so poetically articulated. And this is a mirror, so you see yourself there. And I'm sorry I cannot show you the whole installation, but do go back and see it. It is phenomenal. And here's another one. This is an artist who I believe she was trained in Japan, or she was born in no. She's self-taught, but there's a Japanese part of her work. I mean, the drawings is exquisitely done, and there's this sort of mirroring impact of these floating, dreamlike images that become in themselves a new creation. This is not in the show. Do you all know who this person is? Okay. His first name? David. David Beckham. We saw him. I don't know if that ad campaign. This is borrowed from an actual advertising campaign that was in Manhattan throughout about a year or so, less than a year ago. So you could see that on all the double-decker tourist buses, taxis, and I mean, typical Manhattan, right? And so, in fact, these tattoos are absolutely real. There's nothing invented apparently about that. And there's a whole chapter in the book that you saw at the entrance. This is all incredibly complex as a form of creativity. I mean, tattoo is not just a form of art that came out of the woods. It's a very, very sophisticated, complicated, painful for the carrier of this particular work of art. And this is called a sleeve. And a sleeve like this takes months, if not years, in the making. I was recently, I now become so interested in tattoos that I can't, I'm making myself almost embarrassed when I'm with somebody else. I see a waiter or waitress in a restaurant who carries a tattoo and say, oh my goodness, oh wow. I have to comment on the tattoo and I have to get to know what, there was a waitress last week who was serving us the dinner, and she had one of those sleeves that was kind of, there were patches white, and I said, how long did it take you? 3 years, still in the making. Yes, no, you really have to give it patience and pain. But this, the product is something quite significant. And what I'm going to articulate in front of your eyes, to begin with, trying to place that for you to think about through the form of a pun on the name of David, is how we, in the art world, and I think in a way Don and his team and the State of the Art show has actually contradicted what another David, and I believed was impossible to do, which is to actually bring in this kind of creativity within the framework where that kind of creativity is shown. As you know, this is in Florence. The Accademia is one of the most revered work of art, one of the most canonical work of art, and that is what I'm going to talk about with you for a while. This notion that the art world essentially is made out of canons, that they are good things, great things, and I'm not, by the way, in the slightest criticizing this work of art. Well, even though as a teacher I sometimes show this slide, and I'm always surprised that there's always at least one person in my class who says, I don't like this. And I said, why? What's not to like? I mean, this is perfection in itself. But no, so I'm saying this because, in effect, there is no such thing as absolute beauty. That this notion of canonical beauty, which means essentially that all of us here, let's actually put it to the test. All of us should love it. All of us should find it one of the most beautiful works. Is there anybody in this room who doesn't quite like this work or finds anything reprehensible about it? No? Well, Vasari, I applaud you. Vasari would be, and certainly Michelangelo would love it, would love you. So would you understand what the canon, or did I see a hand here? No? No, you love it too. Okay. Sorry? Yes, yes, exactly. So let's look at another form of canon. The actual term comes from this, the notion of the canon, that is something that you cannot resist, something that pulverizes you, that's something that is shockingly beautiful. And here's obviously Jeff Koons, who is superbly represented in the collection, the permanent collection of this museum, through the Hanging Heart, a yellow version, which I adore, and the placement of which is so great. And this is Koons playing on another kind of thing. You know, he loves to create these large, sometimes very, very large sculptures that are essentially magnification, aggrandizements on a bronze scale, on a vast scale, of a toy, a little toy. He has 8 kids, and so there's a lot of toys around in the house all the time. So this is like, as it says, a toy canon. I'm sorry, I apologize, I wanted to do this. This is the title, and you can see how this is in fact a little plasticky thing, and this is the hem of a little badly done toy that was, not finished properly. He's decided, the artist, to keep every single little imperfection of that tiny plastic toy and magnifying it to something about that scale. Of course, playing also with the fact that this war object is filled with a bouquet of flowers, so playing with the fact that we are in the art world, inside a magma, I would call it, of contradictions. And I'm going to try to put some of those out for you, not to try to preach or to conclude. I mean, obviously I feel that Don and I are very much on the same line, but just to put it out in front of you so that you decide what you like or not. And in fact, I'd like to go back to Koons, because I'm in the midst of writing a book on him at the moment, a rather theoretical, rather philosophical book. And one of his, when you talk to him, I don't know if you've had this because I know he's actually been here, and one of the terms that recurrently comes through in his speech is the notion of acceptance. And I don't know if some of you were here when he came, and he has this very soft-spoken, very charming, very measured tone of voice, he talks about acceptance and tolerance. And what he's actually talking about is the impossibility to declare that this is the only form of art acceptable. Again, I'm saying it again, I love Michelangelo. I have gone to Florence and cannot possibly go to Florence without going to revere this magnificent work of art. But this is not the only form of art. And I am questioning in front of you today this notion of canonical beauty. Okay, and I think that's what perhaps the work that Don and his team have put together does as well. Questioning it not by saying that we should include ugliness in it, but that there is more to it than meets the eye, that if you actually do make the effort of going out, as they all did, throughout the United States, you will see a plethora. And I'm sure that there was, I mean, how many more works could you have included in the show, right? It's endless. Yeah, thousands. So here we are in 19th century France. And by the way, I had no idea, I mean, this was prepared months ago. I had no idea what the tragedy was going on today in Paris. This was shown and with great success in Paris in 1870. And this is an artist who was infinitely famous, Jules Lefebvre. People like Monet, Renoir, Degas, Pissarro were nobody, Cézanne, nobody had heard about him, and Van Gogh was still preaching at this to figure out his own truth. But what is interesting to me in this painting, which was very well known, is that this is an allegory. What is an allegory? It's a symbolic representation. It's a representation of a concept, truth. Truth is not a person, it's not a thing, that is immortalized or embodied through the figuration of a particular human figure, in this case a nude woman holding this light torch that has seemingly no source. The source of light is where does the light actually come from? It comes from above. It necessarily cannot come from this part, which is dark, or nor from behind. So the artist has suggested that this allegorizing figure holding truth is holding the truth from above. And from above, you cannot discuss that truth. That truth is not debatable. That truth is not criticizable. That truth stands for its own. And you accept it or you're out. And so, sorry. What I'm trying to say again, be prepared for a few layers of complex and if not downright contradictory propositions. That's what I want to do in front of you today, okay? And we can talk about it afterwards, and I'm very happy to take however critical your questions or responses might be. Here is an example of one of the most recent works. In fact, the one of them was shown at the last retrospective, which just ended at the Whitney, of Jeff Koons's work, and this is the Venus, the so-called, the balloon Venus. What few people know is that he actually started this vast thing, which is, it's something like 6 feet tall. Or it's very, very impressive. It's one of his largest ever sculptures. And this thing, sorry, the juxtaposition on the slide is very confusing at this stage. This thing is actually one of the oldest artifacts of humankind history. It was discovered in Austria, in Willendorf, and it was called the Venus of Willendorf, even though Venus absolutely did not exist, nor did any kind of mythological system that we know existed. But what we do know, and you can tell from what archaeologists know, and you can tell from the sheer anatomy of this figure, we don't quite see her face, but we see her anatomic features, which are very much those of a fecund woman, of a woman who is pregnant. And therefore, this is an object of fecundity. This is a votive object to which was. It's very interesting that this is the oldest work of art that is known to this day. I mean, there are some debates here, but look at the date: 22,000 to 24,000 BC, before Christ, and here we are 2008 after Christ. And in between is this connection which I'm interrogating in front of you today. You know, how do we go from the very first ferment of creativity in mankind to this? And my thought, I mean, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, we'll discuss this, but my point is that really there is the continuum of an incredibly fertile, without wanting to make too bad a pun here, fertile thread of creativity that continues to evolve over and over and over. And what is interesting is that somebody like Jeff Koons, who is still in, I've paid my penance in a way for being one of the curators who's worked with him, because he is still. I one day was doing a show in Brussels with a few works by him. And there was a curator who I know very well, and I'm not going to name her, but whose work is an arch modernist curator. And we've always had extremely good terms and very friendly. And she sends me this outrageous email, as if I slapped her or insulted somebody in her family, saying, "How dare you bring this nonsense in Brussels? This is..." So this is the effect that Koons can have. Yes, it is difficult to have. But what I'm trying to put in front of you is the fact that he is, even today, sort of considered as somebody who has totally broken the path. He has gone too far out. He has continued, in a sense, the lineage of Michelangelo and the lineage of Jules Lefebvre, forgetting that there is in between Lefebvre and today what we know as modernism, which is superbly represented in the collection. And my point to you again would be the two are not necessarily exclusive. One can like Donald Judd and one can like Jeff Koons at the same time. So, here, sorry, I just love puns. I read too much of Freud. So here you are, in fact, in Venice. And you're looking at people who are doing exactly what you're doing. They're looking up. You're looking at yourselves, in a way. You're looking at spectators. This is an audience looking at another audience. But what are they looking at? Do you know? I mean, as the legend tells you, they're actually looking at David. David is over there, the big, tall Michelangelo David. And Thomas Struth, this great, great German photographer, it is just totally coincidental that his name includes the word truth in it. But Thomas sort of went behind Michelangelo and just started looking at people looking. It's a fascinating exercise, I find, conceptually. He is basically, his subject matter is aesthetic contemplation. He's looking at you looking at art. That is, the art, you don't know what it is. It's sort of hidden behind his camera. But here, what he's interested in is what you think, what he sees, what his camera retains as you experience individually, all these different individuals. Look at how many of them there are. And you know, is he bored? Is he tired? Does he want to get his next shot of espresso? And you know, who is enthralled and who is not? What is he doing? What is he looking at? And so on. It becomes such a fascinating game if you get into it. And this is what Struth has been famous for. He has essentially staged for us what we do in museums become his subject matter. The idea that that an aesthetic judgment, we go in front of a work of art, each one of us here, and there's something that happens in us. We can be bored, want to go away, we can hate it, be repulsed. That's another form of aesthetic judgment. Or we can say, oh wow, this is amazing, I didn't know that, I want to know more. And I'm absolutely not trying to dictate what form of aesthetic judgment one should follow. What I'm saying is that what Struth has kind of brought to the fore is the fact that there's a multitude, there's as many forms of aesthetic judgments as there are of us in this room, and many more of us in any given museums. So here's another example back in academia. And what I would like to show you suddenly is that, a bit of a jump here, that there are forms of art that are what I would call transcendent. And certainly the very last monumental project created by Raphael, the Transfiguration, just before he died, and this monument, I mean, and really this is something that I feel does bring you to your knees as you see it, it is again not incompatible to feel this moment of elation in front of this masterful, grandiose, creative bravura by this guy, this kid who was barely more than 30 years old. I mean, he was a youngster, and another form of creativity by youngsters. Now, this guy was in his 20s when he was doing this, became world famous as one of the topmost skateboard figure performer. And by the way, I was very struck that as I was driving by on the way to Crystal Bridges, you have a set of skateboard bowls that really look very, very impressive. I have to admit, I'm sure he would be. Now, he retired because when you're above, when you pass your 30s in the skateboard world, no way you can do this. But he became very famous for doing this super agile thing. He's 30 or 40 meters high, feet high, excuse me, 10 meters sometimes high, takes off his skateboard from over his feet, stretches his arm, hence the Christ Air title of his performance, putting it back and just falling within a few nanoseconds. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing. And just what I would like to try to say, and so here we are obviously in the wild art area. So we have been introduced formally to wild art. What I would like to say is that I was once discussing with the mother actually of an engineer of skateboard bowls, which is a technique that is very complex. And you have to calculate angles. It's really fascinating and detailed architectural practice. And her son was doing these bowls, these famous bowls. And she knew I was working on wild art, and she said, so who's the most important, the most impressive person you've known? And I mentioned Chris Hosoi. Never heard of him. I said, well, it doesn't surprise me, but he is very famous. So she texts her son, and she says, have you heard of Chris Hosoi? Within seconds, the answer comes back, duh. Have you heard of Jackson Pollock? And so what I would like to bring back is this notion of notoriety in the art world. This William Powell Frith, the railway station, was perhaps one of the most formidably successful paintings in Victorian England in the 19th century. It was so successful that the artist made a ton of money. The idea that, in the 19th century one had to die before becoming rich and famous, that's absolutely not true of William Powell Frith, who in fact had been successful before at the Royal Academy, showing some of his works, and a very clever art dealer told him, look, you get so many thousands of people who come to see your works, why don't we try to cash in on that? He said, oh, that's a good idea. And so they started to charge a shilling per entrance. And with tens of thousands of people, which in those days, I mean, is a colossal number of audiences, of viewers who came paying a shilling to see this work of art. But supremely smart, that art dealer also told him, look, this will become so popular that what we should actually begin to sell is the copyright for this image. So they made an enormous amount of money charging entrance fees to begin with, and then sold the copyrights for another absolutely astounding a sum of money. So this is what I find interesting there, this painting, which is surprisingly not known to the larger public today. I mean, it's the specialists, of course, know it in Victorian English art, but it was a very, very important moment in the 19th century. And the quote here that you have is by one of the founders of what I've spoken about already, which is modernism. And what is modernism? And so basically you have somebody who is looking at this painting, not liking it, or more likely, a better way to say it, resenting himself for perhaps coming close to liking it. and not knowing what to do with that feeling of enjoyment that he has. Modernism, and I don't want to sound too caricatural or too cynical about it, but it's essentially a school of thought in the history of art that has produced monumental examples, which I personally revere, but the ideology behind it I do not necessarily revere, and that is that you have to strip yourself from this kind of easy, facile joy that you have as you lick an ice cream that you love, or that when you kiss your most tender baby. That is the form of emotions that should not be part of the picture when you come to a modernist temple and look at works by Sir Lewitt or Donald Judd, both artists whom I revere. But I don't revere the modernist ideology with it, if you see what I mean. So this kind of, it became a bit of a war, in fact, so it started in the 19th century and then became very activated in the early 20th century in Britain with this Clive Bell, but there were other people. I'm not going to get into the details of that. Then very soon this moved to the United States, from Britain, London to New York, and there, shortly after World War II, comes this very influential figure. I'm sorry, did I not mention him here? Yes, Clement Greenberg, excuse me. This citing another critic called Dwight MacDonald in a very, very crucial text written in 1939, but that was going to carry over for decades and decades, called Kitsch or Avant-Garde and Kitsch. And here, basically, you have the kind of two bastions being plotted for you. You either love avant-garde, you love Picasso, or you love kitsch. You love Russian realist, British Victorian, all this kind of easy, facile, enjoyable stuff that doesn't make you think. And God be with you. Why, after all, should ignorant peasants prefer Repin, says he, a leading exponent of Russian academic kitsch, to Picasso, whose abstract technique is at least as relevant to their own primitive folk art as is the former's realistic style. And here's another representation. This, you know this, of course, Guernica versus much more famous. I chose a portrait of a peasant by Repin, but this painting is in the Tretyakov in Moscow, and is perhaps one of the most significant works that was created in the 19th century. And you think again about what goes on in Russia pre-Bolshevik revolution, where like 40, 50 years before the communist revolution, okay? In fact, this is almost contemporaneous to the Frith painting of the railway station. And it's also contemporaneous to many of the paintings you have here, okay? This type of realism in the 19th century is extremely alive, extremely important. To try to dismiss it with the back of the hand, as Greenberg did, you saw that quote, is to me incomprehensible. Of course, we are in a different period today, and we're almost a century later, but it is still something I have difficulties, to be honest, to reckon with. So here is another, I've asked you to preface to ask you to be prepared for odd contradictions or odd contrast. What do those two people have in common? Not much. This is this ominous dictator. He's the father of the present one, who has given us so much trouble with the Sony cyber attacks. We've all read about that, right? That's Dad. And Dad was no better than the son, I guarantee you. And this is, of course, one of the gods of modernism, whose work I absolutely adore, Jackson Pollock. What they have in common, if you see what I mean, is the fact that, oddly enough, they were born the same year. But they also have something else in common, which is this concept invented by, in fact, Clement Greenberg, of this notion of all-overness. In modernism, what happened, because as modernism embraced abstraction, what disappeared is the truth-bearing torch figure of Jules Lefebvre. The notion of figuration, the notion of compositionality articulated around a vertical axis versus a horizontal landscape background had to go. And Pollock was so significant in part because his creativity exploded on his canvases, literally underneath his feet, and everything was covered equally. So this notion of all-overness was absolutely paramount to the birth of modernism, to one of the key moments of modernism, should I say. And here you have Andreas Gursky. Who knows Andreas Gursky? Because I knew Don would, but yeah, okay. So only a few hands. Okay, he is. Don will absolutely contradict me if he feels differently. I would say one of, if not the most important living photographer today. He lives in Germany. He's represented by some of the most important art dealers. His works fetch well over the $1 million figure these days, and they are essentially constructed photography, very large scale, incredibly detailed. And when you look at them, you think, how can a photographic lens do that well? In fact, he is partly manipulating it with technological devices and so on. But it's just daunting when you see them. So these slides cannot possibly do it justice. But what is interesting is that he chooses in this series Pyongyang. Now, you all know what Pyongyang is. It's the capital of North Korea. So what is this? What are we seeing here? Well, you see, these are human beings. These are figures, usually women, but sometimes men. And in this particular sequence, they all carry two color shields. And it takes this dictatorial, these authoritarian regimes love this. China does the same. You will see other examples of this kind of performances by which thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of these school cheerleader type of people are trained to be musically savvy and to know when they turn the white shield, when they turn the red shield, and they have to look at their chronometer on their wrist to know, oops, red, up, white. And so all of a sudden this whole configuration turns into something else. What I find interesting here is that you have, in a way, another form of all-overness. And that is precisely what Gursky is interested in capturing here. But what I also find interesting is that this configuration of the triangle, the squares, the concentric, look at this, and look at this. Oddly enough, there is here, and I'm not going to make more of it than one should, there is a very strange conflation of the use of, let's say, the same vocabulary, artistically speaking. From a very sort of reduced, formalistic, we are talking of squares and concentric figures being articulated all over. Now, in absolutely, totally different context, in a freedom, speech, democratic civilization and culture, which is North America. North America has always been about that. In fact, this is the very history, the very culture of the country we live in, and versus, of course, the absolute opposite, which is this totalitarian, violence-oriented, threat-oriented culture that North Korea has produced over the past decades, of which we still see the effects. And I find interesting, in fact, today, that the very same articulation of this kind of rhombus, lozenges articulated within each other, yet again in a totally different context, but is produced by the so-called Ghost of Dream, these two artists in Brooklyn. Now, unfortunately, this all goes back, this notion, to Nuremberg. Nuremberg was, for those of you who don't know, one of the, if not the very darkest episode of the modern history, the process by which the Nazis in Germany kind of invented, in fact, this genre, brought up these, again, tens of thousands of soldiers who were train, because you don't do this like spontaneously, you know, get in rank and do it. You know, it takes a lot of severe, arduous training to become as precise as this, and this kind of, yes, performative, theatrical, gestural, very, very, it's meant to impress and to produce a message. So this is where all that started. You know, and it continues today in China, by the way, and in other places, certainly in Korea, North Korea as well. In fact, here is another perfect example. This is Pyongyang in 2012. So 2012 is 100 years after the birth of Jackson Pollock and of Il Sung. Now, they're not celebrating Jackson Pollock's birth. And what I find fascinating is that this is, of course, a completely different time, but it has the same resonance, this kind of vast public-scale performances that you know, transcends almost any boundaries of the imagination. I should have showed you as well the Beijing Olympics 4 years before, which were, you know, Russia was trying to do better, and there's this notion of almost outdoing what the previous one had been doing. This is Sochi in last year, as you recall. So what am I trying to say about all this? What I'm trying to say is that out of a fairly rudimentary, fairly basic, classical almost vocabulary, the one that is almost the vocabulary that our K to first, second, third grade children learn, the use of squares versus rhombuses, of angles, of the birth of geometry is present in so many vastly different configurations, with so many vastly different kind of messages and so many different sorts of impact. Okay, I am certainly not saying that Mondrian, because he is using, again, a similar, sorry, I jumped too fast, a similar structure to the Pyongyang performances, is at all to be identified with the Pyongyang performance. Absolutely not. But it is interesting to see that the core of their formulas remains the same. And here's an interesting quote that I love from one of my professors, Todorov, and here he says he was looking at this so-called glaoui rugs. For those of you who collect rugs, this is a particular tribe in Morocco they were a nomadic tribe, and they're very, very, very sought after. And you see again the articulation of this absolutely basic, fundamental vocabulary. Beauty does not always or only appear where it has been decreed to exist. So he sort of lays the ground here. Popular art deserves consideration not only because it can serve as raw material for great art, which is what modernists like to say, but because it is often beautiful in its own right. And it's, I mean, I'm sure some of you will perhaps question this, but it is indeed a very beautiful thing to look at, a glaoui rug. Yes, he says it in a provoking way, but I know he's absolutely sincere here. I would gladly swap my Mondrian for a fine Moroccan rug. The problem is that he doesn't have a Mondrian. So we go now into wild art again. And so wild art basically, contrary to modernism, and again, I do not wish to appear to criticize modernist artists. Only what I'm perhaps questioning is the discourse around modernist artists, if you see what I mean. Not what the artists are saying through their art, but what is being said about their own works. And so what is interesting with wild art is that it has essentially no limits. It has no boundaries. It certainly has no museum boundaries. I mean, with the exception, which I'm sure is going to be a major precedent of what Don and his team have produced. So far, David Carrier and I were, as I said before, almost certain we would never see wild art within a museum confine. And this kind of thing, you know, lends itself to almost any kind of use, any kind of context, as you can see here, that one can possibly imagine. I saw the great Rockwell in your museum. It is stunning. It is absolutely amazing. And Rockwell, of course, you probably know this, is the bête noire, is the scapegoat for all this modernist ideology I'm telling you about. He is of the same generation, more or less. I mean, he's a direct contemporary of Pollock, Rothko, Newman, of the arch-modernists in this country, in New York City, roughly after World War II. And he is being, I mean, when you read what, I mean, Greenberg, but everybody, all the modernists had to say about him, it was almost as if he had, I don't know, it's incomprehensible how much hatred he had gathered around him. And this is, what, an artist who produced, what? Lovely images of, you know, a cop and a kid who sort of, you know, obviously run away from home and sort of establishing a dialogue there that is both friendly and questionable. I mean, there's a lot loaded there in those images, and certainly there is so much in your own. So those kind of juxtapositions between modernism and wild art are very, very rare to find, but I believe that there is no essential reason why this dialogue could not happen. And this is actually a show that I was responsible for in Germany, in Frankfurt, and this is a museum. Now, of course, I'm not sure whether Jeff would quite agree with the notion of, maybe he was very, very instrumental in this, and in fact, he proposed this juxtaposition. So you have here a work by Jeff Koons himself, seen in the context of one of the greatest altarpieces outside of Italy by Andrea Della Robbia, the Assumption of the Virgin. And it's not just the fact that it's in ceramic and that the two works work with the same material, but in the same colors. But there's, when you see that first image, you almost wonder if it's not kind of what's been, how it's been put together, because they strangely belong. And when you saw those works in the same room, you could actually almost palpably verify that Koons was a true sculptor, because he was seen in the context of old master sculptures of this kind, and there was absolutely no dissonance between them. I think that was a great lesson for me. So what I'm going to end the first part of this talk. I don't know. No, you know, because it's not. I don't have a computer. I cannot activate this. Okay. So I'm going to tell you that this is a. My wife is a doctor, so I've come across this medical term. Any doctors in this room? No? Oh, surprising. There was always a few doctors normally, but okay. So the concept I'm going to tell you, it sounds very pedantic, no, but it's phagocytosis. Maybe there are a few biologists, no? Or chemists? No, okay, all right. Well, the notion of phagocytosis is, I'm going to say it very quickly. Basically, you have two cells, a big one and a small one. The small one is a very unfortunate one because it's going to be eaten up by the big one. But how does the big cell eat up? This is basically the cancerologists know. I mean, this is what happens in cancer big time. The big one, you see the way it's very malleable and so on, basically will come in and sort of wrap itself around it. So essentially it doesn't destroy the little one. It just surrounds it and just bring it in. And just the little one essentially dissolves in the big one. That's phagocytosis in a nutshell. So let's move on. Two examples of contemporary artists, living artists, youngish artists who are, you know, in their 40s or so. Lucy Mackenzie and Rachel Harrison, much spoken about in New York City. They both have been showed at the Museum of Modern Art, at the Whitney, and have had they have what we know as an international career, well known in Europe and so on. Both of these artists, famous as they are, basically do this kind of phagocytosis example. She has a whole company where she employs rug producers, wall painters, decorators, and she actually has those people work out with her on her own installation. And she, Rachel Harrison, is a fan of NASCAR and of the whole race car industry, and always punctures those. I mean, this is difficult to see here, but there's often images referencing an industry that normally has absolutely no place within the prim and proper structures of the modernist art world. So with that in mind, let's perhaps move now to what I wanted to talk about, and that you will not see in the book, because when we signed the book last year, again it's in Germany, it's in Frankfurt, this is purely serendipity, there was all over Frankfurt, if you can imagine that, dozens of such murals. Normally they're called graffitis, but they were of such scale and so ambitious. I mean, you could almost think that this is like a collage or a Photoshop, but absolutely not. This is an actual artist, all from Brazil. If I should speed up, don't tell me. I'm just aware of time. But and I wondered how this was possible. And you have another one, and this is a police station. And sometimes you had this kind of thing on a church, I mean, on a bank, on an official building. As I said, dozens of them. I inquired the city mayor of Frankfurt, the directors of the museums of Frankfurt had basically gone to Brazil, sent a delegation to Brazil, and said, after knowing that graffiti or wall painting is so important in that particular culture, especially in Sao Paulo, that they would turn their city open and let those guys come in. They brought in dozens of Brazilian taggers and graffiti artists of great skill and told them, you choose your canvas. A police station, take it. You know, and I mean, unbelievable. It takes the Germans to do this kind of thing today, but I must say the result was quite breathtaking. And this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about wild art. Essentially, you can see my point now, it is solidly, usually I was proven wrong by Don today, but it is solidly outside the confines of the art world proper. And I have to salute, I mean now in absolute deep, honest sincerity, again, Don's efforts, because I think you guys not only have changed it's a sea change exhibition in its content, but the fact that you have it in a museum of the scale and impressive stature and quality as Crystal Bridges is astounding itself. So on those two sides, I really salute you. But here I kind of do a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek dialogue. This artist is actually quite well known. Yayoi Kusama, she is still alive. She must be in her 80s or so. She was very important in between Japan and America in the late 50s and early 60s, precisely doing these. You can imagine how these dots, captivated the New York audience of the 1960s. Except that she had nothing to do with modernism per se. She was really interested in something else. She was interested in very organic, physical, or bodily representations of substances. And this has nothing to do with it, but this is just one of the multitude of staircases, of steps that you have in San Francisco. And where you see here this little girl climbing up this decoration. Who did this? We don't know. Much of wild art is almost nameless. And one of the things that I tell some of my students is that there a whole, students who are writing theses are always very eager to find something that nobody has done. And I'm saying, well, nobody has worked on this person, Find out who that is. And there's literally a whole body of knowledge that needs to be produced on where that comes from. So here's so as much as possible, it's taken us 6 years to find out many of those names, and so I can just about imagine. I mean, how much time did it take you? Almost a year. It puts us to shame. Wow. Okay, I'm not going to speak about wild art anymore. But so here's a lot of this takes literally the street as a material, and often I was talking about boundaries and boundaryless forms of wilderness. It is really like the Wild West. The wild art is this, what you cannot contain. And some of them get arrested. I mean, the graffiti, for instance, in New York City continues to be mostly illegal, unless you have permits or unless it's on a particular surface, a particular facade, where you have authorization. So look at what this guy did. What I find it fascinating, this Brad Downey, is that what he's actually recreating is not very far from the type of compositions that Mondrian himself in 1917 was articulating, the so-called Pier and Ocean series. If you, I should have brought a slide of this. But here's now we're totally off and we're really in the desert. There's this thing called the Burning Man. Has anybody been to the Burning Man? Yes? Oh, okay, many of you. Okay. Wow. Okay. Well, I should have brought more images. That tells me a lot about you then. Okay. No doctors, but several Burning Man attendants. So you see many more things than those things, but one of the most bizarre things you find in the Burning Man, which is the desert now, with tens of thousands of people come in, and it's this explosion of creativity where everybody and anybody is allowed to do almost anything they want, provided it is, based on consensual agreement and harmless mostly. What I find absolutely fascinating is how the car, the vehicle, becomes literally the vehicle for a form of expression that is almost impossible to imagine. Here's another form of street art that is difficult to. This is the key here. This is a whole entirely done with colored chalks, trompe-l'oeil surface. So basically, you can walk. I mean, these kids, these guys are playing with you here, but you can absolutely walk freely here. This is the opening to the sewer system. This is in Europe. This guy is also super famous for this. He does these so-called 3D street paintings, giving you the sense that you're about to fall into a precipice, whereas in fact this is just basic tar and concrete. Absolutely amazing. And look him up, Edgar Müller, very famous in Europe for this kind of monumental forms. Now, I'm moving on to, I was saying that a lot of it is nameless. There is now a quantity, I mean, an unfathomable, uncountable number of things pouring down through social media. I'm going to name only two of them. This is where the source of these come from. Often they just have no names, called Pinterest. And I don't know if some of you are, yes, okay, I see that. And Instagram, I'm sure many of you are on Instagram. Yes, you're on Instagram, I see. Well, so you will find, I mean, a ton of this kind of material if you look for them, and it is fascinating. It's yet again a whole genre that has essentially been unmined. And what I find fascinating, it was so interesting to see your collection here today, and we're not in Arkansas here, we're in Michigan, but I mean, I find the use of Grant Wood's imagery for this kind of 21st century digital projection absolutely fascinating. Again, who is the artist? We have no idea so far. So I think I will leave you with this, I think, tantalizing images, but I'm genuinely very interested in knowing, first of all, your responses to this, but also I would like to hear maybe from Don and his colleagues, since several of you have done me the honor of coming tonight, how you see the future, the seeds that you have put here, because I think it is, again, of colossal impact. And so I would like to thank you again and applaud you. I would like to applaud you for what you've done.
Joachim, I'm going to give the mic to Chad and let him speak to you.
Yes. Hi, Joachim.
Hi, Chad. How are you?
So you brought up a number of popular art forms, you might call them. I love the term wild art because it seems to sort of escape from the confines that we normally understand art to live within, right? Mm-hmm. And indeed, in this context, all of us are sitting here, but just beyond the glass panes, there exists a world that we conceive of our institution being a part of. We think of Crystal Bridges as being a stage where we can have a conversation between art and nature. And indeed, wildness and the natural have a kind of rhyme
Yeah.
and reason to them.
Absolutely.
And so I'm really thankful that you came here and you saw State of the Art and the ways in which we tried to look beyond what the traditional confines are for the art world.
Yeah.
I loved that quote that you put up about the art world existing wherever art is displayed, and indeed we went all over the country in search of those alternate ways of viewing and understanding where art can exist.
Yeah.
You pushed against my understanding of where art can exist, and I love that you are talking to an audience here where the comment that you made, not so many doctors, but lots of folks who know about Burning Man. I mean, you're talking to the right audience.
Yes, absolutely,
right?
absolutely. Yes.
And I mean, how many of you folks have seen State of the Art more than one time?
Wow.
Right. So you're talking to folks. I mean, this is a community that that has rallied around this institution.
Yeah.
We are thirsty for more.
Yeah.
And State of the Art is just the beginning of a conversation that we hope to continue. And thank you for participating in that.
Well,
in that
thank you.
conversation.
Mutual thanks.